At 7:50 a.m. on the 19th of June 1944, Captain James Blanchard peered through his periscope aboard USS Albacore SS-218, and he could make out the silhouette of an aircraft carrier, a cruiser, and several other support ships. The carrier was heading 288 degrees and was 70 degrees off Albacore's port bow at a distance of approximately 13,000 yards. This was an attack opportunity that Blanchard could not pass up. As a result, he increased speed and turned to port, bearing 272 degrees in an attempt to close the distance and create a firing solution. Then at 7:55, Blanchard could make out the silhouette of a second aircraft carrier headed 329 degrees, and it was only 10 degrees off the starboard bow. Blanchard decided that based on his course and the Japanese carrier's courses, that the second carrier would be the most optimal target, and as a result, he would attempt to set up a firing solution beginning at 9,000 yards. Blanchard would identify his chosen target as one of the two 27,000-ton Shokaku-class aircraft carriers, and he estimated that it was steaming at a speed of 27 knots. In reality, he had let the Zuikaku pass, as it was the first carrier he had sighted, and he was now looking at the brand new Taiho, which was the only vessel of its design constructed, and it was a 35,000-ton vessel. Taiho was the flagship of Carrier Division 1, flying the flag of Vice Admiral Ozawa, and it was under the command of Captain Kikuchi Tomozo, whom was transferred from the Zuikaku. At 7:45, 10 minutes before Albacore spotted Taiho, it began launching aircraft to participate in an attack on U.S. task forces, and it would contribute 16 Zero fighters, 17 Judy dive bombers, and 9 Jill torpedo bombers. Launching was concluded at 8:02, and the aircraft would fly counterclockwise around Taiho while they got in formation. At 8:08, Captain Blanchard had fed all available information into the torpedo data computer, and he was ready to launch a salvo of torpedoes. This would begin at 8:09, 32 seconds, when he fired 6 torpedoes, with the first 4 being Mark 23s and the last 2 being Mark 14 3As, all set at a depth of 4.3 meters, and they were fired in 7-second intervals. The torpedoes were set at a speed of 46 knots, and at the moment they were fired, it was estimated that Taiho was approximately 2,000 yards away, and it was steaming 90 degrees perpendicular to Albacore. Based on calculations, within 2 minutes, all 6 torpedoes should find their mark. Back on Taiho, several witnesses saw one of the Judy dive bombers fall out of formation and plunge into the sea. It was identified as being piloted by Warrant Officer Komatsu Sakyo, whom was believed to have lost sufficient speed and fallen from the sky, but after a few seconds of observation, torpedo tracks were seen in the vicinity of his crash. Lookout Yano Saburo, whom had witnessed the aircraft crash into the sea, was the first to take action when he yelled into the voice tube, "Torpedoes starboard, 45 degrees, moving towards our ship." Shioyama Sakuichi from the technical division would then state, "Then white bubbles were seen on the surface. Torpedo wakes." The loudspeakers on the bridge blared a command, and some of the crew felt cold. Now the wakes of torpedoes approached the bow. The first passed. The second passed. All passed. But then a water column rose high on the starboard side, forward of the island bridge. Some of the bridge personnel got wet, and the ship reeled under shock. Torpedo hit, and there was some confusion amongst the crew members. With the Japanese having been alerted, the Albacore went to deep submergence and awaited the results. At 8:11, 27 seconds, a muffled explosion was heard, and it timed with the 6th torpedo, which was one of the 2 Mark 14 3As. The Japanese would ruthlessly depth charge the estimated position of the attacking submarine, but Albacore would only be shaken, and no severe damage was incurred upon it. It would escape without casualty. Back on Taiho, the vessel had been hit at frame 54 on the starboard side, which was outside the forward aviation fuel tanks. At the moment the ship was hit, all of its watertight doors were closed, and the crew was at general quarters. Though the ship had trembled under the explosion of the torpedo, the damage appeared minor, and the vessel continued on at 27 knots in an attempt to escape further attacks. At the moment of impact, the forward elevator had been in the up position. Its hoisting cable slacked, and the starboard rear platform broke off the pulley system. As a result, the the elevator fell at an angle and was jammed between the flight deck and the floor of the upper hangar. Shioyama made his way to the emergency control room shortly after the torpedo hit, and while he was there discussing the situation, the smell of kerosene began to permeate in the room. It was then reported that in the forward elevator pit, a mixture of gasoline, water, and oil was beginning to build up. This was a serious issue, as the elevator pit's floor made up the roof of the forward avgas tanks. This meant they had cracked or ruptured. After sailing away from any threats for a few minutes, Captain Kikuchi ordered a reduction in speed to 25 knots, and by this point Taiho had picked up a 1.5-meter trim at the bow. Vice Admiral Ozawa found himself in an abnormal position. Taiho was judged to still be, for the most part, operational, with the exception of the forward elevator, which was stuck between decks. As a result, Taiho was unable to land or launch aircraft, and so he ordered damage control teams to patch the hole up with makeshift planking. By 9:20, the forward elevator well had been patched over, and Taiho could resume flight operations as normal. This is when the issues on Taiho began to worsen. As fuel flowed out of the cracks in the forward aviation gasoline tanks, it began to vaporize and spread throughout the hangars. Within a few minutes, the lower hangar was uninhabitable and had to be abandoned, with the exception of emergency repair teams that had to wear specialized gas masks. These emergency repair teams would risk their lives and attempt to plug the cracks in the top of the aviation tanks by entering the forward elevator pit. But, as the vapors began to build up, men began to fall unconscious, and this effort had to be abandoned. As a result, Captain Kikuchi and damage control officers decided it was time to activate the emergency ventilation system in both the upper and lower hangars. This system was specifically installed to rid the hangars of dangerous vapor buildups in the event of situations like this, and their ducts were located near the floors of the hangars where the vapors would build up most densely. 4 ventilation duct gates to the starboard side and 5 to the port side were activated and opened to full capacity. All available hatchways from the side of the hangars that went to the exterior of the ship were also opened in an attempt to support the ventilation system. Unfortunately, Taiho's closed hangar design was hindering it at this point, as even with the improved ventilation system over previous Japanese carriers, it was not acting at a high enough capacity to rid the ship of vapors. As a result, and as a last-ditch effort, the crew was given hammers and ordered to bust out all available portholes. Over the next couple of hours, the vapors would continue to build up and spread throughout the ship, and this was a result of unknown issues with damage control at the time, as when the forward elevator pit was planked over in order to allow flight operations to continue, the forward ventilation ducts were accidentally covered over, and as a result, the emergency ventilation system was partially being starved. This meant that the vapors were not being replaced by air, but instead they were building up within the ventilation system and being spread throughout it. This issue was being assisted by the crew's efforts to bust out the portholes, as rooms that were previously free of vapors were now being exposed to them. As a result of the continued buildup of vapors, it was decided to lower the after elevator to its pit, creating a large makeshift air duct which had a positive effect on the ship's situation. During this time frame, it was also attempted to empty the forward elevator pit of its gasoline-water mixture, though this attempt had failed. At noon, it was decided that Taiho should continue aircraft operations. As a result, the after elevator had once again been put back into service and was raised to flight deck level, and it would continue to work between the hangars. This had partially obstructed the makeshift ventilation duct that it had created initially, and this was decided because of the ventilation system operating at full capacity and the fact that the crew did not know it was packed with the vapors. All of these factors combined would result in disaster, as at 14:32, the vapors would ignite and Taiho would be riddled by an explosion. The acting navigator from the bridge would state, "The explosion appeared to be centered in the vicinity of the forward elevator opening. The armored flight deck was split down the center, and both side bulkheads of the hangars were blown out. The heavy flight deck seemed to deflect the force of the blast downward." Shiyoyama, who was now in the operations room, would describe the explosion like the detonation of a bomb deep in the hall. The operations room moved like the houses during the Great Kanto earthquake. Dust remaining from the fitting outwork poured from the deck above, and the room was filled with smoke. I took a gas mask. The speed of the ship fell suddenly. The environment was like a dead town. The machine guns which had been placed on the flight deck disappeared, and the ready-use ammunition exploded. In all probability, everything within the hangar exploded. The armor of the flight deck was ruptured and lifted. No personnel was seen on this deck. They all must have been blown into the sea by the blast of the explosion. While it is not known how much damage was caused to the Taiho's hull from this explosion, it was undoubtedly extensive, as flooding would hasten, and the oil pump system had also been damaged, and the primary machinery was starved of lubrication, resulting in its failure. The ship's bow ahead of the island was engulfed in flames, and these flames would begin to move aft until they began to cover the island. The ship's fire control systems began to go offline as a result of failures from the flames overcoming the system, or as a result of personnel being unable to use them due to the buildup of the flames and smoke. Regardless of those factors, the moment the explosion occurred, Taiho was a total loss, and this was quickly recognized, and abandoned ship was ordered. A destroyer would come along the stern, since it was rising out of the water, and would collect the crew from there. The ship's bow trim and port list would continue to increase, and at 16:28 it capsized to the port side and went down by the bow. Survivors that were dumped into the water would be picked up by the destroyers Wakatsuki, Hatsuzuki, and Isokase. Shortly after Taiho disappeared from the surface, a series of explosions would occur that was felt from the cruiser Haguro. Initially it was thought that the vessel was under attack, but it was recognized that these were explosions from the Taiho. It is believed that it was the Taiho's depth charges exploding when they had reached their preset depth. Out of the 2,038 men assigned to the Taiho, 660 men would be lost with the ship. Among the survivors were Vice Admiral Ozawa and Captain Kikuchi. The survivors were transferred to the Zuikaku, including Ozawa, whom would continue to command the battle from there. But on the next day, he recognized that all efforts were in vain and ordered his forces to retreat. He would return to Japanese waters with 3 of his carriers sunk. The Albacore would return to the Marshall Islands, where Captain Blanchard was awarded the Commendation Ribbon for damage to a Shokaku-class carrier. It was not yet known that he had sunk the Taiho. By the end of 1944, 2 prisoners of war would express to United States intelligence that Taiho had been sunk at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and Captain Blanchard was awarded the Navy Cross as a result to rectify the mistake that had been previously made. Unfortunately, the majority of Albacore's crew would not know of this, as the Albacore went missing at sea in November of 1944, while Captain Blanchard was on a different assignment. On the 26th of August 1945, Taiho was officially removed from the Imperial Japanese Navy's operational register. The losses of Taiho, Shokaku, and Hiyo, along with nearly 1,000 aircraft during the Battle of the Marianas, was the blade in the heart of the Japanese Navy. All future air operations had to be cancelled due to a lack of personnel, carriers, and aircraft. Going into this battle, the Japanese had laid everything on the table. They were either going to win with great success or suffer a complete catastrophe, and as a result of this battle, the Japanese Navy would completely collapse by the year's end. This was undoubtedly one of the most decisive victories with lasting impact that the Allies would have during the entirety of the Pacific War. With that having been said, I have nothing more I wish to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.